In the final months of 1944, Allied sailors in the Pacific began reporting something they had never encountered before. Radar operators detected single aircraft approaching at abnormal altitudes. Anti-aircraft crews prepared for standard intercept procedures. But instead of evasive maneuvers, the incoming planes held a straight, unwavering course. They ignored tracer fire. They did not break away. They did not attempt to escape. At 10:53 a.m. on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a Japanese A-6M0 dove directly into the escort carrier USS St. Lo, detonating its bombs and igniting aviation fuel on the hangar deck. Within minutes, secondary explosions tore through the ship. By 11:25 a.m., St. Lo rolled to port and sank. The after-action report contained a phrase that would soon spread across the entire Pacific Fleet. Deliberate suicide attack. The era of the kamikaze had begun. By mid-1944, Japan's strategic situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. The Imperial Navy had lost its veteran carrier pilots in battles from Coral Sea to the Philippine Sea. Fuel reserves were critically low. Aircraft production lagged far behind American industrial output. And the loss of Saipan placed US B-29 bombers within striking distance of Tokyo. Inside the Naval General Staff, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi argued that conventional operations were no longer viable. In his view, only extreme measures could delay the inevitable American advance toward the home islands. If Japanese pilots deliberately sacrificed themselves, he believed, their explosive impact could inflict catastrophic damage on Allied invasion forces. On October 19, 1944, Onishi formally created the 1st Kamikaze Special Attack Corps at Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines. The name, Kamikaze, Divine Wind, referenced the typhoons that repelled Kublai Khan's Mongol invasion in the 13th century. The implication was clear: these suicide pilots were to become Japan's last defensive storm. Within weeks, the program expanded to include both Navy and Army air units. And by 1945, suicide attacks evolved into an entire strategic doctrine. Contrary to popular myth, the majority of kamikaze pilots were not zealots volunteering in a burst of nationalistic passion. They were often inexperienced students drafted into accelerated aviation programs. Japan's veteran aces had been lost years earlier, and by 1944, the average new pilot had fewer than 100 flight hours, far below American standards. Many recruits described being pressured into volunteering during ceremonies where declining was socially impossible. Diaries recovered after the war reveal internal conflict, expressions of fear, resignation, and duty to family rather than devotion to death. Training emphasized only basic flight skills and the mechanics of attacking a ship. Precision aerobatics, advanced navigation, and dogfighting were no longer relevant. Pilots learned how to maintain a steady dive angle, identify vulnerable points on ships, and time the final descent to maximize damage. Aircraft were often stripped of armor and weapons, loaded with 250 kilograms bombs, and in many cases, insufficiently maintained due to shortages. The goal was not survival. It was a single impact with maximum explosive force. Kamikaze tactics varied depending on weather, aircraft type, and the defensive formation of Allied fleets. Standard procedure involved approaching at low altitude to evade radar, then climbing to 5,000 feet for the final dive. Common aircraft included A-6M0, the most widely used; Ki-43 Hayabusa, Army variant; D-3A Val, dive bomber; Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, rocket-powered piloted bomb. The Oka, nicknamed Baka Bomb by Americans, could reach speeds over 600 miles per hour, making it nearly impossible for anti-aircraft guns to track. It was carried beneath a G-4M, Betty, bomber and released near the target. The weakness was the slow, vulnerable Betty itself, which was often destroyed long before launch range. Kamikaze pilots aimed for the most critical sections of naval vessels, the flight deck of carriers, the bridge of destroyers, and the engine rooms of cruisers. Even small planes could trigger catastrophic fires when loaded with explosives. Because Kamikaze did not attempt to evade fire, their attack profile was radically different from traditional pilots. For Allied gunners, it created a new kind of fear. They do not turn. They do not brake. They come straight in. For sailors accustomed to aerial combat, kamikaze attacks were uniquely terrifying. In previous engagements, shooting down an enemy aircraft brought relief, the threat was neutralized. But with kamikaze, even a critically damaged plane could remain lethal until impact. Reports describe pilots guiding burning aircraft into ships. Some came apart in midair, only for the bomb to continue on a fatal trajectory. On destroyers, where a single hit could kill dozens and cripple the vessel, sailors described the attacks as inescapable. Radar operators reported waves of aircraft diving simultaneously, creating scenes of overwhelming chaos. Survivor accounts from the USS Laffey, which endured 22 kamikaze and bomb attacks on April 16, 1945, reflect the psychological impact. They kept coming. We thought the ship was finished. Every plane looked like it was aimed at me. The combination of inevitability, speed, and absolute commitment made kamikaze one of the most feared threats in naval history. Between October 1944 and August 1945, kamikaze inflicted some of the heaviest damage suffered by the U.S. Navy in the entire war. Notable incidents include USS St. Lo, sunk at Leyte Gulf. USS Bunker Hill, struck by 2 kamikaze on May 11, 1945, killing 389. USS Franklin, hit by a dive bomber near Japan, resulting in 807 casualties. USS Laffey, nearly destroyed by coordinated suicide attacks. HMS Formidable, severely damaged despite armored decks. In many cases, a single aircraft achieved what entire squadrons had previously failed to do. The combination of explosive payloads, fuel ignition, and the vulnerability of ships during operations made suicide strikes disproportionately destructive. During the Battle of Okinawa alone, more than 36 Allied ships were sunk or rendered total losses by kamikaze attacks. The Battle of Okinawa represented the high point of Japan's suicide tactics. Over 3 months, Japan launched Operation Kikusui, a series of 10 massive coordinated attacks involving more than 1,500 kamikaze. Wave after wave targeted radar picket destroyers placed deliberately far from the main fleet. These ships absorbed the brunt of the attacks, buying time for carriers and battleships to prepare defenses. Destroyers stationed at picket points were the most dangerous assignments in the Pacific. Crews reported constant air alerts, sleepless nights, and battle stations lasting up to 72 hours. Loss rates were severe. In some operations, nearly half of the attacking kamikaze reached the vicinity of their targets, a far higher success rate than conventional air raids. To survive kamikaze waves, the U.S. Navy implemented new defensive systems. Layered radar-controlled fire. Combat air patrols (CAP) operating from carriers. Picket destroyers detecting incoming attacks. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells. LCS-L gunboats, providing close-range defense. Despite these measures, many ships remained vulnerable. Destroyers and escort carriers lacked the armor of larger vessels. Even battleships suffered serious damage when struck at critical angles. By the spring of 1945, Japan was launching kamikaze missions from airfields with only a handful of functioning aircraft, often using training planes made of wood and fabric. Fuel shortages forced pilots to receive only enough for a one-way flight. The desperation was unmistakable. Although kamikaze inflicted significant casualties, they failed to achieve their strategic objectives. There were several key reasons. Loss of experienced pilots. Japan's best aviators had been killed earlier in the war. Suicide pilots lacked the skill to penetrate layered defenses reliably. Limited aircraft quality. Aging fighters and hastily built trainers were no match for American radar and CAP. Overwhelming Allied production. Even catastrophic damage could be repaired. Ships returned to service within weeks. Fuel and logistics collapse. Japan could not sustain the operational tempo required for strategic effect. No deterrent impact. Kamikaze failed to slow the American advance toward the home islands. By the summer of 1945, Japan had exhausted nearly all aviation resources. Suicide units remained active, but their ability to affect the war was gone. The legacy of the kamikaze is one of tragedy rather than tactical brilliance. Thousands of young pilots died in missions that had little chance of altering Japan's fate. Diaries recovered after the war reveal fear, doubt, and longing for home, a stark contrast to the propaganda image of joyful sacrifice. For Allied sailors, the memory of kamikaze attacks remained deeply imprinted. Veteran accounts consistently describe them as one of the most terrifying experiences of the Pacific War, a fusion of psychological shock, overwhelming noise, fire, and the sight of aircraft intentionally diving toward their ship. Today, historians view the kamikaze as the desperate culmination of a collapsing empire, a strategy born not of strength but of necessity. The attacks inflicted undeniable damage, yet they could not stop the industrial and numerical power arrayed against Japan. The era of the kamikaze lasted less than a year. But its impact on those who witnessed it would endure for a lifetime.